The winter fog had settled over London with unusual tenacity that December evening, turning the familiar streets into a landscape of shadows and muffled sounds. I sat in our Baker Street rooms, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, while Holmes occupied himself with his violin, drawing forth a melancholy air that seemed to match the weather outside. It was the sort of night when one felt grateful for warmth and companionship, and when the distant world seemed very far away indeed. Yet it was on precisely such a night that the world would intrude upon us in a most extraordinary manner. The knock upon our door came at 8:30. Mrs. Hudson showed in a gentleman whose appearance immediately arrested my attention. He was perhaps 50 years of age, well dressed in a manner that spoke of wealth but not ostentation, with a pale complexion and eyes that darted nervously about our sitting room. His hands trembled slightly as he removed his hat, and there was about him an air of profound disturbance that went beyond mere anxiety. Holmes set down his violin at once and indicated the chair by the fire. Before I continue with this most peculiar case, permit me a moment to address those who find pleasure in these accounts of mystery and reason. If these chronicles bring any entertainment to your evenings, I would be most grateful if you would consider offering your support through a simple subscription, a like, or by sharing these tales with others who appreciate the unusual and the unexplained. Such gestures ensure that these stories continue to find their audience. With that said, let us return to our visitor and the extraordinary claim he was about to make. "Mr. Holmes," the gentleman began, his voice unsteady. "My name is Richard Ashford. I am a collector of antiquities, and I have come to you because I fear I am losing my mind, or worse, that something impossible has occurred." Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin, his grey eyes sharp with interest. "The impossible, Mr. Ashford, is merely the improbable waiting to be explained. Pray continue." Ashford drew a deep breath, as though steadying himself for a plunge into cold water. "3 days ago, I acquired a mirror, an antique piece, 18th century, with an ornate gilt frame. Nothing about it seemed unusual at the time, but when I brought it to my home and hung it in my study, I noticed something extraordinary. The mirror shows reflections that are not of the present moment, but of the past." I confess I nearly laughed at this statement, but Holmes's expression remained grave and attentive. "You mean to say the mirror reflects events that have already occurred?" Holmes asked. "Precisely," Ashford replied. "At first I thought it was merely a trick of light, or perhaps my eyes playing tricks upon me. But the phenomenon has continued. When I stand before the mirror, I sometimes see myself as I was hours earlier, wearing different clothes, in different positions. More disturbing still, I have seen other figures in the reflection. People who were in the room earlier, but who are no longer present." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Has anyone else witnessed this phenomenon?" Ashford nodded emphatically. "My wife saw it yesterday evening. She looked into the mirror and gave a cry of alarm. She claimed she saw herself standing in the study as she had been that morning, wearing her blue dress, though at the time she was wearing gray. She refuses to enter the study now. My servants whisper about it. One of them, my housekeeper, Mrs. Graves, says the mirror is cursed and should be destroyed. "Where did you acquire this mirror?" Holmes inquired. "From an estate sale in Kensington. The estate of the late Professor Malcolm Hendricks. He was a scholar of optics and natural philosophy, though I understand he had fallen into obscurity in his final years. The sale was poorly attended, and the auctioneer mentioned that Professor Hendricks had been particularly attached to it, that it had been in his private study for decades." Holmes rose and crossed to the window, peering out into the fog-shrouded street. "Tell me, Mr. Ashford, has anything else unusual occurred since you acquired this mirror?" Ashford hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes. 2 nights ago, I thought I saw something in the reflection that disturbed me greatly. I saw myself standing in the study, but I was not alone. There was a figure behind me, indistinct but clearly present. When I turned around, there was no one there. But in the mirror, the figure remained for several seconds before fading away." "Did you recognize this figure?" "No. It was too indistinct, like a shadow with human form. But Mr. Holmes, I have been troubled by dreams since that night. Dreams of Professor Hendricks, though I never met the man. In these dreams, he is trying to tell me something, trying to warn me of some danger. I wake in the night with the conviction that the mirror is not merely an optical curiosity, but something far more sinister." Holmes turned from the window, his decision clearly made. "Watson, fetch your coat and medical bag. We shall call upon Mr. Ashford's residence immediately. This matter requires direct observation." Ashford's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I cannot tell you what comfort it brings to have your attention to this matter. I have begun to doubt my own perceptions, to wonder if I am suffering from some malady of the mind." "We shall determine the truth," Holmes assured him. "Whether that truth lies in optics, psychology, or something more unusual remains to be seen." The cab ride to Ashford's residence in Belgravia took us through streets transformed by fog into something from a Gothic. A comfortable room lined with shelves of books and display cases containing various antiquities. And there, hanging upon the far wall between 2 windows, was the mirror in question. It was indeed a handsome piece, approximately 4 feet in height and 3 in width. The gilt frame elaborately worked with scrollwork and classical motifs. The glass itself appeared slightly darker than modern mirrors, with a faint silvering that suggested considerable age. Holmes approached it slowly, examining it from various angles. I watched as he stood before it, studying his own reflection with intense concentration. "Watson, please note the time," he said. "It is 20 minutes past 9. I consulted my watch and confirmed his observation. Holmes continued his examination, moving close to the mirror's surface, then stepping back, approaching from different angles. He produced his magnifying glass and studied the frame with minute attention. After several minutes, he stepped away and turned to Ashford. "Please stand before the mirror, Mr. Ashford, and describe precisely what you see." Ashford complied, though with evident reluctance. He positioned himself squarely before the glass and stared into it. For a long moment, nothing occurred. Then Ashford drew in his breath sharply. "There," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you see it? That is not my current reflection. I am wearing my brown jacket in the mirror, but I am wearing my black jacket now. And my position is different. In the mirror, I am seated at my desk, but I am standing here before you." I looked at the mirror and saw only what I expected to see. Ashford standing before it in his black jacket, with Holmes and myself visible behind him. "Mr. Ashford," I said gently, "I see only your current reflection. You are standing, wearing your black jacket, exactly as you appear to us." Ashford turned to me with wild eyes. "But surely you must see it. The reflection shows me as I was this afternoon." Holmes placed a calming hand on Ashford's shoulder. "Mr. Ashford, I want you to close your eyes for a moment and breathe deeply. Watson, please examine Mr. Ashford's pupils." I did so, noting that his pupils were slightly dilated and his pulse was elevated. "He shows signs of considerable stress," I reported, "but nothing immediately alarming from a medical standpoint." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Ashford, have you experienced any headaches in recent days? Any unusual sensations? Perhaps a bitter taste in your mouth? Or moments of disorientation, apart from your experiences with the mirror?" Ashford considered this. "Yes, actually. I have had persistent headaches, particularly in the evenings. And now that you mention it, there has been an odd metallic taste that comes and goes. I attributed it to my wife's new cook experimenting with unusual seasonings." Holmes's expression sharpened with interest. "Mr. Ashford, I must ask you to trust me in what I am about to do. I want you to leave this study immediately and not return to it for the remainder of the evening. In fact, I would prefer if you and your wife would accept Dr. Watson's invitation to spend the night at Baker Street as our guests. Watson will make the arrangements." I looked at Holmes in surprise, but quickly understood that he had some theory in mind. "Of course," I said. "You would be most welcome." Ashford seemed torn between confusion and relief. "But, Mr. Holmes, surely you must investigate the mirror further. How can you determine its nature if I am not here?" "I shall investigate it most thoroughly," Holmes assured him. "But I believe your presence may actually impede my observations. Please trust me in this. Pack a bag for yourself and Mrs. Ashford. Watson will see you safely to our rooms, and I shall remain here to conduct my examination." Within half an hour, arrangements had been. Hudson received them with her characteristic hospitality, installing them in our spare room and providing tea and comfort. Mrs. Ashford was a sensible woman who seemed more concerned about her husband's state of mind than any supernatural mirror, and I did my best to assure her that Holmes would resolve the matter. Once they were settled, I returned to the Belgravia house, curious to learn what Holmes had discovered. I found him in the study, but he was not examining the mirror. Instead, he was on his hands and knees, inspecting the floorboards with his magnifying glass. He looked up as I entered, his face alight with satisfaction. "Watson, observe the dust pattern along this section of floor. What do you make of it?" I knelt beside him and studied the area he indicated. There appears to be less dust in a particular pattern, as though something has been repeatedly placed here. Precisely. And now, observe the position of that armchair in relation to both the mirror and this dust pattern. I did so, and understanding began to dawn. The chair was positioned such that anyone sitting in it would face the mirror directly, and the dust-free pattern on the floor suggested that some object had been placed between the chair and a small table that stood nearby. "Something has been removed," I said. "Recently, I would judge," Holmes confirmed. "Within the last day or two. Note also the faint discoloration on the table's surface here. Something stood upon it regularly, leaving this mark. A vessel of some kind, I believe." Holmes rose and moved to the fireplace, where he examined the ashes with his stick. "These ashes contain traces of a botanical substance that has been burned recently. And here, in the coal scuttle, I find fragments of what appear to be dried leaves." He held up several small pieces for my inspection. Even in their burnt state, I could see they have the appearance of some form of herb or medicinal plant. Indeed, and when we combine this evidence with Mr. Ashford's symptoms, the headaches, the metallic taste, the visual distortions, a picture begins to emerge. Let us examine the study from another angle. Watson, what do you notice about the ventilation in this room? I looked around. It is quite close. The windows are shut tight, and there is only the one door. Exactly. Now observe the position of Mr. Ashford's favorite chair. It faces the mirror directly, and it is positioned quite near this small brazier, which I perceive is used for burning incense or similar substances. The pieces were beginning to fit together in my mind. Holmes, are you suggesting that Ashford has been inhaling some substance that produces hallucinatory effects? I am suggesting more than that, Watson. I am suggesting that someone has deliberately been exposing him to such a substance. Note the careful arrangement. The chair positioned for maximum exposure. The brazier conveniently placed. The poor ventilation ensuring the fumes would remain concentrated. This is no accident. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. But who would do such a thing, and why? Holmes crossed to a cabinet and began examining its contents. Consider what we know. Professor Hendricks was a scholar of optics who became increasingly reclusive in his later years. Ashford purchases a mirror from his estate. Shortly thereafter, Ashford begins experiencing bizarre visual phenomena and shows symptoms consistent with exposure to certain psychoactive compounds. Someone wishes him to believe the mirror is supernatural. But to what end? He pulled a small notebook from the cabinet, flipping through its pages. Ah, here we have something interesting. This appears to be Professor Hendricks's diary, left behind accidentally when the estate would. The compound, derived from datura, produces reliable visual distortions when administered in controlled doses. Subjects report seeing temporal displacements in reflective surfaces. The effect is enhanced by suggestion and poor lighting. I believe I have discovered the mechanism by which the ancient oracles achieved their visions. Good Lord, I breathed. Then Professor Hendricks was conducting experiments in producing artificial hallucinations. So it would appear, and someone who knew of these experiments has attempted to recreate them, using Ashford as an unwitting subject. The question is, who knew of Hendricks's work? And what do they hope to gain by driving Ashford to believe in a supernatural mirror? Holmes called for the housekeeper. Mrs. Graves appeared, a stern woman of middle years with suspicious eyes. Mrs. Graves, I am investigating some unusual occurrences in this house on behalf of Mr. Ashford. I wonder if you might answer a few questions. She nodded warily. I suppose so, sir, though I've already told Mr. Ashford I'll not work in a house with cursed objects. Quite understandable. Tell me, has anyone visited this study in the past week? Anyone at all, even tradesmen or delivery persons? Mrs. Graves considered. Well, there was a gentleman came round 3 days ago, just after the mirror was delivered. Said he was from the auction house, wanting to make sure the piece had arrived safely. He asked to see it, and Mr. Ashford showed him into the study. He was here perhaps 20 minutes. Did this gentleman give his name? He said his name was Carter, I believe. Yes, Mr. Carter from the auction house. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. Mrs. Graves, can you describe this Mr. Carter? Tall gentleman, well dressed, perhaps 40 years of age. He had dark hair and spectacles, very polite spoken. And did you observe what he did while in the study? Not really, sir. I brought them tea and then returned to my duties. When I came to collect the tea things, he was just leaving. Holmes thanked her and dismissed her. Once she was gone, he turned to me with certainty in his expression. Watson, I believe we have established the mechanism of the deception. This Mr. Carter, who I suspect is not from any auction house, came to the study ostensibly to inspect the mirror. While here, he introduced the psychoactive compound into the brazier and possibly left a supply of it somewhere in the room for continued exposure. We searched the study thoroughly and eventually discovered, hidden inside a decorative urn on the mantelpiece, a small packet of dried plant material identical to the fragments Holmes had found in the coal scuttle. Datura stramonium, Holmes pronounced, examining it carefully. Commonly known as devil's weed or Jimson weed. In small, repeated doses through inhalation, it produces vivid hallucinations, particularly visual distortions. The symptoms are cumulative. Each exposure strengthens the effect. But Holmes, what is the motive? Why go to such elaborate lengths? That, my dear Watson, is what we must now discover. But I have a theory. Mr. Ashford is a wealthy collector with a valuable collection of antiquities. I suspect that someone wishes to drive him to believe he is losing his sanity, perhaps to gain control of his collection or his finances. A man who believes he is experiencing supernatural phenomena, whose own senses cannot be trusted, is vulnerable to manipulation. The following day, Holmes's theory was proved correct. Through his contacts at Scotland Yard and inquiries at the auction house, he learned that there had been no Mr. Carter on their staff. However, investigation revealed that Professor Hendricks had a nephew, James Hendricks, who matched the description Mrs. Graves had provided. This James Hendricks had expected to inherit his uncle's estate, but had been left only the mirror, which he considered worthless. The valuable papers and specimens from his uncle's experiments had been destroyed, or so he claimed. When confronted by Inspector Lestrade, young Hendricks broke down and confessed. He had discovered his uncle's notes on the Datura experiments and had conceived a plan to drive Ashford mad, intending to eventually present himself as a concerned friend and persuade Ashford to sell his collection at absurdly low prices, or perhaps to name Hendricks executor of his affairs. The mirror itself was entirely ordinary, merely a convenient focus for the hallucinations the drug produced. The Ashfords returned to their home once it had been thoroughly aired and cleansed of any remaining traces of the compound. Within days, Mr. Ashford's symptoms ceased entirely, and the mirror no longer showed anything but ordinary reflections. They chose to sell the mirror nonetheless, unable to shake entirely the memory of those strange days. James Hendricks was sentenced to 5 years' imprisonment for fraud and attempted extortion, his elaborate scheme undone by Holmes's methodical investigation. As we sat by the fire in Baker Street some days later, Holmes reflected upon the case. It is remarkable, Watson, how readily the human mind can be deceived when chemistry and suggestion work in concert. Ashford was an intelligent, educated man, yet he believed absolutely in the supernatural properties of that mirror, because his own senses told him it was so. He did not consider that those very senses could be compromised. It is a sobering lesson, I observed. Indeed, the mind is both our greatest tool and our greatest vulnerability. We must learn to question even the evidence of our own eyes when that evidence conflicts with established natural law. The mirror that showed yesterday taught us that sometimes the greatest mysteries lie not in the external world, but in the mechanisms of perception itself. The case was closed, and the mirror returned to being merely a mirror. Its brief career as an instrument of deception concluded. Yet the lessons it taught remained with us, a reminder that in the realm of detection, as in life, one must always distinguish between what one perceives and what actually exists. That distinction maintained through careful reasoning and rigorous investigation, is the foundation upon which all truth must be built.